Good afternoon. I work these days for an organisation called ICF. We do studies that, for the Commission mostly, helping proposals and their processes move around the system. And I sort of, Tim gave me a call and I looked at all the people who came before. I made it, as best I could, an educated guess of what would have already been said. Was partially successful. And I just wanted to unpack a couple of the propositions that are already surfaced so far today with some reflections on, personal reflections, I should say, rather than this being an ICF position, on the kind of the mechanics of the process. We've talked about the fact that in a Brexit environment we don't have ministers around the table in the Berlaymont voting on things. Of course, those votes and the processes immediately leading up to them are one. It's a snapshot of a much broader and ongoing process of policy development and review. I thought it might be worth touching on that as for a moment to think about what the implications might be. In very simplistic terms, this policy making cycle in Brussels is not dissimilar from that here. As somebody identifies that there's a problem. Quite often there'll be research work done to evidence that. Some options it's agreed that there's a problem, some options get worked up. We think we might have something we need to deal with here. And under Commission procedures, there has to be an impact assessment done before any legislative proposals get put up through the system. So people like ourselves do the impact assessments. The policy, if it's adopted, gets implemented, and after a period of time there's a review and there's a formal evaluation process. Both these two steps have very lengthy guidance attached to them of all the questions that have to be addressed around efficiency, effectiveness, coherence, added value, etc., etc., etc. And it's that evidence base that helps determine, in case of the evaluation, what gets reviewed, what can stay the same, where adjustments get made. And so the footprint of these pieces of work and consideration around it matters in terms of the policy development. I put together a list of the number of times when doing these things, we've been asked to look in depth at the impacts of either existing policies or proposed ones on EEA and EFTA countries. This slide presents the list of studies from the last couple of years that I've worked, and going back further. And we work across migration, climate change, and as well as food. We do not get asked what the impact is on Iceland. It's just not on the map. The officials in Brussels are there to serve the members and their masters, and it's about making the club work. Occasionally, if something comes along which is going to really annoy the Americans, then yes, we have to go and look at that and try and cost it up. But working out how to make it work for the Americans is not part of our job. We don't get asked that. We come up with the numbers, and that's about the limit of it. So if we're then, as Britain, on that list, then you face the prospect that if we do have a problem with a proposed or an existing law, then even getting that discussion on the map and into the system may itself be a problem. It's not a matter of not having the vote in the room, it's that the issues that you'd like to discuss perhaps are not on the agenda and not being looked at in the first place. You're not going to get heard. If we sort of move on a little bit, I think David, previous speakers have brought out some of this. The UK at the moment, in various ways, does influence the EU policy debate. Quite often in the processes we're part of, the contribution is I think is often very helpful, because instinctively British civil servants tend to approach these issues with questions about the benefits and the costs and the proportionality. If the researchers here go out and look for studies on costs and benefits of policy, there are very few member states that you need to go to look for these sorts of things. Much of Europe just doesn't appear to bother. The UK does, and it builds these sorts of words, the language, the approaches into its approach to the policy-making process. And so those questions and the form of the proposal that emerges from the debate will be different, one might reasonably assume, in the absence of the UK than with. And if we take the proposition that was put up earlier, that we probably, given that this is the largest market for our exports and where we get a lot of food, we're going to have to live with a lot of these rules anyway, then our reference point isn't being annoyed, the rules that people are annoyed with at the moment, but it's the rules that we'll get without the UK being part of the debate, including reviewing the rules that we've got at the moment. Which could, from the point of view of the people who are annoyed with existing laws, put them in even in a sort of less good place than they are at the moment. The other point was one that I think Jenny touched on this in some depth already, the implications for food safety. And also, and it's not the same thing, but issues, the current efforts to tackle food fraud as well. We have obviously a single market, there's a harmonised set of controls. There are audits and other things in place to try and make sure that they are applied consistently. Not clear that they always are, but there's a framework for a consistent approach there. And we've got the private sector also trying to take cost and complexity out of the system, get transparency and so forth. There are networks behind these laws. We talk a lot about the legislation, but the legislation is realised in terms of networks of people, of data, information systems and processes that work across this market. So, as others have mentioned, if we're out of that, what bits do we have to buy ourselves back into in order to understand what's going on? There's a system that distributes food alerts if some safety problem is found in food, which I think Norway subscribes to, traces. I'm not sure how much they pay for it. Presumably we'd have to pay something similar. We have EFSA providing a sort of pan-EU approach on risk assessment. Are we going to have to buy a subscription to that as well? We're going to have to replicate our own. Do we just listen? Then there are other supporting systems. There's a scheme called Better Training for Safer Food, which brings food safety officers from around Europe and basically trains them on what EU law actually requires and gives them a chance to talk to each other and share best practice. We're probably going to be out of that loop as well, or can we buy our way in? As far as I can see, there are BTSF programs for third countries, but you don't have the same status as the members do. And you put it together and combined with the evidence from the work that we've been doing for national food safety authorities around Europe, when you get fractured regulatory systems, it's just really, really hard to make them work in the same way. Often it's really basic, practical stuff. It's that the people don't know each other as well. The computer systems don't talk to each other. The data are coded in different ways. And even if you don't start in that same place and you try quite hard to keep pace, what I think tends to happen over time is you get drift and gradual dislocation, which makes things more difficult. And in this instance, it obviously raises questions about whether it helps you maintain the same level of safety. These guys already came up this morning. I think brave was the word Sir Humphrey used to use for decisions like this. We I think mentioned the change that we're talking about here would have very significant implications for the kind of capacity that we would have to have here in the UK system. In a context where there is already, as Tim was often saying, been quite a hollowing out over the years of functions moving to Brussels, moving to devolved administrations, moving out of Whitehall, being taken up by the private sector and so forth. So the functional sort of human resource implications, the skills implications, the practical implications of trying to run a new system at the same time as you're negotiating your way out of another one are probably not to be underestimated. As to where you go forward, I think some people have mentioned, which certainly appeals to me. Perhaps part of the solution is to have a more positive, or to express a positive vision of what we do want out of a European food and agricultural policy, and make the case that perhaps we've got a better chance to get it if we're kind of in the club rather than outside. That's about all I wanted to add at this stage.
Okay, thank you.